So, Namaste again. Welcome all to Satsang. We are continuing with Ulladu Narpadu, 40 verses on truth or what is. We've been going through this every Saturday and we have just slowly come to 22nd verse. Um, Unlike other kinds of works, where if we miss the first 21, then the 22nd verse will make no clue, right? If in any other subject matter, we cannot continue to, or we cannot hope to understand if we don't have the background of the previous 21 verses. But the beauty of self knowledge, as it's called, Atma Vidya, is that it is fresh each time, and every verse is only pointing to the same truth from a different angle. So while listening to all the verses is great and understanding them is very good, in reality, we don't need to understand a whole lot. We just have to understand one thing, which is the limitation of understanding itself. When we recognize the limitation of understanding, that is the understanding that liberates us. There is a difference between, that's why, acquiring knowledge and learning. When we acquire knowledge, we are building on top of something, and it's like building up, it's like any building. We have a foundation, then we build on top of it, then on top of it, step by step it progresses. But learning happens always from the ground of not knowing. It is not a step by step process, but it is seeing the truth from the space of emptiness. That's why there is this beautiful story too. The Zen people use the story of how when a cup is full, they say there is the master who pours the tea into the cup and he is pouring it and the cup is overflowing. And the student says, "What are you doing? The cup is overflowing." And he says, "That's what your mind is. It's overflowing. You have to empty it in order to receive the wisdom." So it's not about gathering knowledge, but it's actually about emptying the cup of the mind to receive each moment in a fresh way. That is the whole point of this whole work, or for that matter, all the great works. They are pointing to the simple truth that what is here and now is reality. The word Ulladu, as we have said many times, means literally what is. So obviously, what is now. What is not something that is an abstract concept that we need to understand, or it's some philosophy we need to internalize. It is only the truth of now that is called as what is. What we are missing is, by looking for it elsewhere, we are missing the truth of now. So the whole pointer of the very title itself and each verse is to bring us to now and be free of this movement of thought, which is constantly going back and forth in time, projecting something or the other, and constantly, therefore, postponing what is available now. So, whether we call it God, whether we call it truth, whether we call it love, peace, all of these are same words. That's why in Sanskrit, All these words are very familiar for everyone. We say prema, shanti, ananda. All of these are just different names for what we call Bhagavan. Prema is love, shanti is peace, ananda is happiness. All of this are just different names for that which cannot be described, which is now. But the truth of what is now is not revealing the peace, the joy, and the happiness and love because it is clouded over by the projections of thought, which is constantly dividing itself and thereby using this moment as a means to some future end. We are always projecting some future wherein we can realize the truth, or we can realize happiness, or we can find love, whatever we call it. And we are using this moment as simply a means to an end, or at worst, an obstacle to that end. So we are in conflict with this moment either by making it a means or by making it an obstacle. To go past that and to recognize that what is here and now is the divine is the simple expression of every verse of Ulladu Narpadu. It is also the truth of what is mentioned in Gita. It is the truth of what is mentioned in the Upanishads and all the great works. That's why very uh, famous verse in the Gita where Krishna says, Vasudeva Sarvamiti, Sa Mahatma Sudurlabha. He says, everything here is Vasudeva. When we take the name Vasudeva, for instance, the mind will project a form, a realm, and a distance in time and space. But Krishna himself says that I am here and now in the very heart as the presence that is animating each moment. So that presence that is here is clouded over by the identification with thought, with images, with various projections. So to remove those projections and the clouds covering over is the intent of any of these works. It is not to gain anything new, but to lose something that is false. So when we are clear about this, then we have a totally different approach to listening itself. Because when we want to gain something, we are in the mode of acquiring. We want to acquire knowledge. We want to build on what we know. And there is the movement of accumulating more and more. And when we bring the same mentality to this also, then we are looking to learn more. We are finished with one work, then we want to jump to the next work. Then we want to learn another work. And there is no end to it. So the point of all of these works is simply that there is nothing that you need to know beyond the simple recognition that what is here and now is already divine. And to shed the false identities and false attachments is the purpose of both wisdom and devotion. As we discussed last time also, because we are on verse 22 now, we just covered the verses on devotion, where he says that true devotion is to see that the very subject is an expression of the divine. So he says, as we know in Tamil, he says, Kanum tanai vittu talaivan tanai kanum. That is, ignoring the one who is seeing, we are projecting God outside us, as Talaivan means leader, or in this case, the head or the master, or whatever term we use. We project as an outer entity, God, while ignoring who is seeing this or who is conceptualizing this. So we are always externalizing while holding on to this subject that is me, and then we claim that we have devotion. But in reality, we are not truly recognizing that the very seer, the one who claims to be the devotee, who is he or who is she? That is the whole question of both surrender and self-inquiry. When we look into this simple question, and each time when we come to this question, we can come to it in a very fresh way. We don't have to remember it. We don't have to look at how many years we are aware of these teachings. Time doesn't matter, because the only thing that matters is this moment when we are listening to it in a fresh way. When we listen from the past, which is very important to recognize, is that normally we tend to listen from the past. We are having a lot of knowledge, and then we are using that knowledge to compare what we are listening, agreeing, disagreeing, and putting it in a particular slot. I like it or I don't like it, and all of this. All of this means we are actually not listening at all, but we are only confirming our existing biases, either positively or negatively. So to be aware of all this is very important, because if you are not aware of it, then we just listen to just confirm our biases, and then we go feeling confirmed either positively or negatively. We say, I agreed with all that, I disagreed with all that, and either way, it's the same movement. But if we recognize that whatever knowledge that is there, in this case, is of no relevance, because here there is nothing that is being presented which requires any prerequisite, any prior knowledge, any prior experience of any kind. All that is pointed to is a very simple, fresh pointer, which is what Sri Ramana Maharshi brings every time, which is, who is the subject that claims to be a devotee or that claims to be the knower? See, because both in knowledge and in devotion, wisdom and devotion, there is the division between the knower and the known, or the worshipper and the worshipped. And then they argue which is better. Some people say, no, knowledge is better because knowledge is somehow venerated, and they can quote some verses of Gita to support that. And then some would say, no, devotion is better because devotion is from the heart. And they can quote some other verses from the same Gita, because in Gita, for instance, there are verses where Krishna says, the jnani is the dearest to me. And then he also says in a different verse that the dearest to me is a bhakta. So it's right. But so when we see it from the division of the mind, which divides everything, then we say we get into argument. But what is being pointed to is that both jnana and bhakti are one and the same if understood properly. If it's not understood properly, then it seems to be different, and then there is argument. Because both in jnana as understood and bhakti as understood, there is division. Division between the knower and the known. So let's say I'm reading Upanishads, I'm reading Gita, I'm reading this. There is a subject here, and then there is the object, which is the knowledge that I'm gaining. Or if I'm saying I'm a devotee, I'm worshipping God in any form, then that division is again there between I am the worshipper and there is the worshipped. In both cases, there is the division which is there between the me and the object of knowledge or object of worship. And when that division is seen as false, because everything is coming forth from the same ground, and there is nothing here that says me other than thought, and thought happens spontaneously on its own, just as all the other processes of the body are also happening. So when we don't have this identification as the persistent sense of me, then both identities as knower and worshipper melt away. Then what remains is the total absence of division, which is true wisdom, which is also true surrender, true devotion. When the division between the worshipper and worship melts away, or the knower and known melts away. And this is done by simply looking into who is the knower or who is the worshipper. So normally when we ask this question, that's why it has been also described beautifully even in the small booklet, Who Am I? The answer comes, I am. So we say, I am the worshipper, or I am the devotee, or I am the knower. Then the question is, who is this I, right? That question sometimes seems very abstract, but if we just look into this, if we just notice the structure of thought, which is what the next verses are pointing to, we recognize that thought, when it comes with its own image as the object and the subject. So to make it very simple, I think recently shared this example too. Let's say I'm thinking about a work situation. Then the moment the thought about the work situation comes, the image of my position at work also comes with it. Or to take another example, let's say the thought about a child comes, immediately the image of the mother or father comes. So the very thought comes with the object and the subject. So I am immediately identifying as the mother or the father, and through that image, through that filter, I'm looking at this thought. So that's why I don't, when I see a child, depending on who the child is, the thought differs, and it determines the filter as the image, as the mother or father or whatever it is, brings forth attachment and judgment and wanting this and fearing this and all of this. So this is very obvious. Now, the reason why this seems to be me is because there is a sense of me that is lurking within, that is going and sitting with each subject, right? So for example, when I'm looking at this phone or looking at this book, there is a natural division between subject and object. There is an I who is looking, and there is the book, or there is an I who is hearing, and there is the sound. So thought, every perception, even every thought, every movement naturally divides itself for that particular perception or action or thought, and then it immediately dissolves. Then the next moment, it's like it's going frame to frame. See, this frame, if you look at take a movie analogy, this frame, I'm looking at this phone, let's say, and there is an I, the subject, the object, which is the phone, and the looking. Then next moment, let's say there is a sound coming from the birds or something, then there is I who's hearing, so there is another frame. So this movement constantly of perceptions, actions, thoughts, words, all of which has its own subject and object. But there is a sense of me within which is constantly rising up to take ownership of this subject, that I am doing this as the persistent center within. So if we look at it, that is the whole question, which is, who is this I? If we look at it, we will feel that there is a sense of me, which is what is called as the I sense or I thought, whatever word we use. In Sanskrit, we call it aham vritti, it's called. There is a sense of I that's rising. And that is going and identifying itself with every perception, every action, every thinking, every word, and so on. And this aham vritti, or this I sense, is what is running our lives. So that is why Ramana Maharshi says every thought is rooted in the I thought, because each thought is taken ownership by this I thought, and it comes and says, I have done it. I have spoken. I have listened. And then I am the worshipper, and I am the devotee, or I am the seeker. All of this, every thought, right from that to very simple things such as I am saying this book, everything is taken ownership by this I thought or this I feeling, and it is constantly running our lives. So we assume and presume that there is this I, a center, who is here within the body somewhere, and then we call it many names such as soul or ego or mind and all of it. And so we saw a verse before too, or I think it's coming, in fact, the verse which says that all of these names are referring to this entity within. So when we look at the source of this entity, where is this coming from? We stay with this very question, and there is no other thought, but there is just the sense of I. And we ask, where is this I coming from? There will be no answer. Because any answer that comes is only coming from the mind, which is knowledge, which is again another thought. So when we recognize that no answer can be given to this question, where is this I coming from? What happens? That's what we were, I think this today also we were referring to. We go to the space of not knowing. Right? See, we always want to know. We want to know something or the other, and this knowing keeps us going as the me. To come to a state of not knowing is very deeply uncomfortable for this me. But if we are able to recognize that there is no possibility of the me knowing its own source, when I ask the question, where is this I coming from? There can be no answer. Any answer that comes is only coming from the mind, which is the past knowledge, which is again a thought. Then you can ask the same question, who is answering this? Who is asking this question? So then we come to this point where we recognize that there is absolutely no answer that can be given to this question. So we come to this deep space of not knowing. What happens normally is we jump out of that not knowing into some concept. We say this is awareness, or we say this is pure consciousness, or say this is Brahman. All of these are words again that are coming back through the back door to assert itself as the knower and the known. So this is why many times people even have asked, why don't we talk about that state? Because anything we say about the state can only be conceptual and abstract and made into another thing for the mind to hold on to. Whether this is exactly the reason why, see, somebody asked once Sri Ramana Maharshi, why did Buddha not talk about God at all? And he gave the same answer. He said, because he didn't want you to speculate about God. Any answer we give, so that's why it is said that when Buddha was asked, does God exist? He kept noble silence. And when Buddha was asked, does God not exist? He again kept noble silence. So if we answer either way, what happens is the mind projects something, and then it makes into a form, and it makes into a concept that it can understand or worship, and thereby keep the division going. So when we recognize that all of these are only projections of thought, and we can't know, and to not know is the true space of humility. See, when we say humility also, we pretend that I'm very humble, and we may say I'm, even many times people use this kind of language and all that, but the me is operating all the time, taking on the ownership that I am very humble, right? So that is not true humility at all. It is actually sometimes a very fat ego that is pretending to be humble. So the important thing is to recognize truly that I cannot know the source of anything, and to be deeply comfortable with that not knowing is to remain in stillness. So when we say the question, who am I, or where is this I coming from, and we stay with that question without answering that question or recognizing any answer that comes from the mind as only knowledge, and therefore go back to the same question, at some point the question stops and there is nothing left, and there is only this space of not knowing. And that space of not knowing is true knowing, which is stillness. That's why the Upanishad says, also in Kena Upanishad, it says, the one who says I know does not know, and the one who says I do not know knows. What does it mean? It seems very paradoxical, but if you understand it, then it's very easy to understand. As long as I say I know, I'm wallowing in concepts. That's why later he says, to say I am that is only due to lack of strength, he says. Uram in my. When one doesn't have strength, then one takes the crutch of saying I am that, I am Brahman, I am this, I am that. All of these are just concepts we have borrowed from the past, and we speak like well, they used to say a tape recorder. We don't have tape recorders now, but whatever it is, we just repeat like parrots, whatever we have heard, and that's all we do. So therefore, when we say I know, we don't know really. We are only parrots, second-hand parrots. But when we truly say I don't know and come to that space of not knowing, then there is true knowing. That's why in the very first verse, Maharshi says, to know it is to be it. You can never know it as a concept. We can never know it in any other way other than simply being free of this division of knower and known. So when there is no knower, no known, and there is no knowing, that is what he calls as the highest knowing. So it's not something that's very mystical or very abstract, but it's a very simple thing. And as I was pointing earlier, even in simple conversations, see, when we say I don't know, a space opens up to listen. Even at work or in families, conversations, wherever. It's a very beautiful thing, but we hardly use it because we want to always know. See, that's why, in many places, for instance, in India, it's a very well-known thing, where if you ask directions, nobody says, I don't know. They will say some direction, whether it's right or wrong, right? They'll say something, because just to say, I don't know is very uncomfortable. You want to say that you know something and pretend like you know. And this happens in everything, right? Like in even when you are having a work conversation, if you notice, true leadership happens from a space of not knowing. When you are not knowing, you are actually learning. You can actually be silent, and that's true humility, to recognize I don't know and be open and receive what is being offered. And then there is a natural processing of it. So even at the level of any conversation, any interaction, going to the space of not knowing is a beautiful thing. But especially here, we are talking of truly the unknown. That's the very name given, right? Unborn. See, that's why the Buddha also says unborn, unknown, unmanifest. And the same exact words are used by Mandukya Upanishad too. Can you quote that word? Yeah. So na so it's not it's basically negating everything, right? It's not but at the end it says ekatma pratyesati, right? Prapanchopashmam shantam shivam advaitana. Yes. So that is what, see, that's exactly what we're saying, right? So when we say we said shantam, you said, right? Shantam advaitam. So when we say peace or love or stillness or joy, they come only through negation. So when we negate the false, then what comes forth is that space of not knowing, which is stillness. So that's the whole point of this whole work. So we can go into the verses, realize it's half the time, but it doesn't matter because it's all. See, now we are in the verse number 22. So we'll see now that every verse will be very easy because this is the basic background behind each verse. Verse 22 says, without turning inwards and merging in the Lord, in His light that shines within the mind and lends it all its light, how can we know the light of all lights with the borrowed light of the mind? See, that's basically what we were talking about. The mind is a borrowed light, right? So that is to say, the mind is is an expression of this light that is what we call as divine. So everything here operates by this divine intelligence. One of them out of that is the mind, right? So we have, for instance, as I always say, how the body digests food is not something the mind knows, but it's happening, and it's happening perfectly. That's exactly why Krishna says in the Gita that I am the one who digests your food. It's an expression to say that it's the divine intelligence which is digesting the food, which is breathing the air, which is making the cells move, which is making everything. So among all of these various faculties, there is this faculty called the mind, which is the ability to think, and it is said to be of various aspects such as thinking, discerning, remembering. All of these are collectively called the mind. But it's still collectively a very small faculty, which is something the humans are fairly uniquely endowed with, because other species don't have the kind of mind which we have. But that is what is causing us to also have this constant questioning, because the mind projects the sense of I, and this I then wants to know the purpose of life, know the purpose of the world, know the purpose of God. All these questions are coming because this I is rising. See, if you look at a flower blooming, the flower doesn't ask any question. It blooms beautifully and withers beautifully. If you look at a beautiful bird flying, the bird doesn't have any question. It's just gracefully flying, gracefully dying. All the animals pretty much live the same way. But humans, we have this unique faculty, which is both a blessing and a curse, because while it has produced all this great comforts and life that is so much more advanced, let's say, but it is also causing all these questions. What is the purpose? What is the meaning of life? Why am I here? So all these questions are there only because there is an I that wants to know the purpose, that wants to know the meaning. And so the question, therefore, is not to answer the intent, therefore, is not to answer the question, but to question the questioner. Who is asking this question? Who wants to know the meaning of life, the purpose of life? It's only the me that is imagining itself to be within this body and experiencing this body and thinks this body is a vehicle to achieve something. And therefore, I want to know what can I achieve through this body. But nature doesn't care at all about all this, because the divine nature that is here, it just takes everything that's here and it beautifully works on more and more beautiful forms. And individual lives do not even matter to nature. right? What nature cares about is just the expression of this intelligence, which is constantly playing. So each moment, there is this beautiful expression of nature, which is what we all are too. But because we divide ourselves from nature, we think we are separate, and then we are looking for all these questions. So that's why he says here, when we are as trying to says, how can we know the light of all lights with the borrowed light of the mind? Because the borrowed light of the mind is so limited, and it cannot possibly know its own source. It's like, to use a crude example, the light bulb in the room trying to understand the source of electricity itself, right? So it's just a small uh, expression of the energy that is coming forth. So when we recognize that the mind, with its limited ability, has its function, but it has to be put in its right place. And that's why it says, when it says, by merging in the Lord, the light that shines within the mind and lends it its light. So when we recognize that this, what we called as the Lord here, is the very source, as it says here, also light of all lights. So that which is making everything happen is the Lord. Whether we call it Lord or whether we call it nature, also, it's the same thing. That's why somebody said once to Ramana Maharshi, I don't believe in God. Then he said, what do you believe in? He said, I believe only in nature. He said, okay, then nature it is, right? Because it doesn't matter whether we call it nature or whether we call it, like, there are many people who uh, supposedly claim to be atheists, but they also admit there is such a thing called nature. So that's why, there are many. In fact, there is a movement in May, which was which is still probably going on, where they denied the existence of God, but they naturally see that there is nature that's working. And so he said, well, nature is another name for God. That's all. But it's an answer to both people, because the theists and the atheists are caught in this problem. The theists think God is somewhere else and nature is something else. And the atheists think nature is here, but there is no God. And so both are false, because nature is God. And the source of nature is God, right? Where nature comes from, the energy, the power that is nature is God. So the one who believes and projects a God above the sky and the one who says there is no God are both caught in the illusion. So that's why in every case he denies, just as both knowledge and ignorance are, the duality of both are false. The duality of the so-called theism and atheism are ultimately false, because they are both caught in the mind, which is the division between the me and the belief that one has. But when you recognize that the very source of the me, the body, this nature, every single cell that's functioning is coming forth from the same source, the light of all lights, as he says, then that's to merge in that light. It doesn't mean merge as in, sometimes we have this imagination of just merging into a light, some fancy experience. None of that. It's just recognizing that, like earlier we saw, to be consumed by him. All of these are just various expressions to point out that there is nothing other than this light, and to be free of this false division is to merge in this light of all lights. The next verse also says, the body does not say it is I, and no one says I do not exist. When I arises, all other things arise. From where the eyes arises, search with a keen mind. That's what we talked about, right? So the body does not say I. That's the first thing, right? See, when the body is functioning perfectly with an unparalleled intelligence, and it never says Like the body doesn't say, I digested the food, I uh, I'm breathing so perfectly, you see, I'm pumping the heart, I'm cleaning through the liver. All these are happening perfectly without any sense of ego, any sense of I. So the body has no sense of I. The body is in fact perfect. The See, many times even in religions, there is an attitude to condemn the body and somehow want to transcend the body and identify with these concepts of soul and all of it. But he says the exact opposite here, which is that the body is actually functioning perfectly. It is the idea of the me, which is the soul, and all the rest. In fact, the next verse says the same thing. We'll read that too, and then we'll take it together. It says, the body does not say I. So again, it repeats the same thing. The body does not say I. Eternal awareness doesn't rise or set. Between the two, bound by the body, rises the thought I. This is the knot of matter and awareness. This is bondage. This is the soul, jiva. This is the subtle body. This is ego. This is samsara. This is the mind. So we see how the problem is not the body. People make body into a problem and then they go into mortifying the body. This is what happens. Even the Buddha, he saw how when he was looking for it, there were people like going to extremes and completely fasting and going to an extreme, or completely denying, which is just as unhealthy as someone overindulging in the body and all that. So that's why even in the Gita, Krishna says, this is neither for the one who sleeps too much or sleeps too little, eats too much or eats too little. You have to keep it all in, which is exactly, that's why many people, those who want to argue, keep arguing, but actually the middle path that Buddha talks about is there in the Gita too. So that's what Krishna also points out. He says the middle path, which is be balanced, right? And when we are balanced like that, then there is no reason to condemn the body, right? Any condemnation of the body comes from the mind again, which says, I will put the body through all kinds of extremes, deny this, deny that, and then it may even project some petty experience, because the body, when it's the chemical imbalance in the body, can project some brain movement, and then we take it as some experience, and then and then hold on to it. All this happens all the time, but that's not the real essence at all. So that's why he says in both these verses, the body is not the problem. It does not say I. The pure light of all lights, as the previous verse said, this here it calls it eternal awareness, whatever we call it, that doesn't say I either. It doesn't rise, or neither does it set. It is always here, whether we are in deep sleep or awake or in dream, whether the day or night, whether this, when the even before this earth was formed, which is a billions of years ago, doesn't matter, right? Nature is always here, and the source of it, the light, the awareness, the intelligence, whatever we call it, is always here. And that doesn't say I. But between the two, there is this false I, which is what he calls the knot. In Sanskrit, it's called as Chit Jada Granthi, the knot between pure intelligence and the body. And this knot is saying I, and that is what is called the soul. He says that is Jiva, that is. So people then argue over different things. Some people call it mind, some people call it Jiva, some people call it soul, some people call it subtle body, Sukshma Sharira, whatever they say. All of these are just different names for this entity which is projected as me sitting within the body. And this imaginary entity then wants to know God, wants to realize God, wants to end rebirth. All of this is only for this. So one religion says you will go to heaven, another religion may say you will uh, end the cycle of birth and death. All of these are only for this false me. So that's why the real pointer of all great sages and Ramana Maharshi here, in fact, what is unique about Ramana Maharshi is that he reveals it in the most direct way without any sometimes, see, for example, even in the Upanishads, it's very poetic, but also it's very cryptic sometimes. Like we said, when it says, those who say I know do not know, and those who say I do not know, no, that's all the Upanishad will say. It's very hard to penetrate that verse. It sounds very poetic, uh, and it's very nice. And Upanishad has this beautiful poetic structure to it, but it doesn't it doesn't make it very clear. You know, in one of the as much as it's very beautiful, they don't say it directly. So that's, in fact, even once Ramana Maharshi was asked about it, he said, "Yeah, that's their way." It's in Tamil. They said, "Ava edhi nera solamata." So they'll not say anything directly. They always put it in some allegorical terms, but then he put it out directly. So that's the unique contribution that Sri Ramana Maharishi first gave, because after that there has been uh, many great beings who have come, who have, see, this way was opened, let's say, of inquiry and true recognition, and now we see how it has become so prevalent even in the West and the East, because um, this is very simple if you recognize the pointer which is being brought forth in every verse. So here again, as we see, not being caught in this idea of a separate self sitting within the body, but surrendering everything by recognizing that everything that rises is an expression of the same divine, and not trying to experience or know it through our petty knowledge, but go to the very source of it, because it is only through identifying with form and experience that this false me is being perpetuated. In fact, the next verse exactly points that out. It says, holding form it rises, holding form it stays, holding and feeding on form it thrives, leaving one form it takes another form, but when sought after it takes to flight. Such is the ego ghost with no form of its own. Right? That's all we were pointing to with all of these verses. Because this, when we say form, what does it mean? It in this we can see that every image we have is the form that the ego ghost takes. Right? So when I'm taking the image of, let's say, mother or father, there is a functional relationship as mother or father that can be done without any problem. But the I comes and sits on it, and then it brings attachment, it brings therefore conflict, projecting something, wanting something, fearing something, all that. Then the next moment it says, see, leaving one form, it goes to another form. Then it can go to the form of my work situation, and then there I'm projecting fear and anxiety and that. And then I'm watching news, and then suddenly it can take on the identity of, I belong to this nation, or I like this party. Then that identity then has its own thoughts and fears and judgments and so on. So it's constantly shape shifting. That's why he says this ego ghost. That's why even the stories we have, the ghost which is constantly climbing on the back and taking different forms. That's what it's doing. So every time it takes one form, and then it takes next form. So it's moving continuously. But when sought after, as he says, when we ask, so that's all that we need to do is, who is identified as this? Who is attached? When we look into this question, we recognize that the identification is through the sense of me that is causing us to get attached to the subject of any thought or any action or any perception. So combining all these verses, we say the body doesn't say I, the body is functioning on its own. But this I rises and takes ownership of the actions of the body. So, for example, vision, as we said, the example of seeing happens on its own. It's a very obvious thing. If you just, for anyone who knows, we don't even need to know much. It's like, I don't see, seeing happens. That's the truth, right? The eyes are seeing, the light is hitting the eye, the it's such a complex process. The brain is processing the image, it's matching it and saying, okay, this is a phone or this is a book. And it's we say I am seeing the book, which is perfectly all right, because that's just a way to express it. There is a subject here and there is an object, book. When I see a person, the same thing happens. But what happens is, especially with a person, it can happen with an object too, where the past knowledge can come in because of this identification and attachment with the subject, this ego ghost, as he puts here, this I that's rising up. It attaches itself to that subject and thereby takes ownership of the action as my action and holds on to it rather than letting it go. So when I'm seeing the book, there is a seeing and it's over. When I'm seeing a person, there is a seeing and it's over. But this me that is rising within as this I sense, as we called it in the last verse, the not, the sense of the feeling that somebody is here, and we touch the heart also and say that I'm here. This sense, I, is what is operating all the time and taking ownership. So if we just go to the sense and say, so that's what it says, when sought, it takes flight. So when you ask, where is this I, we immediately may jump to another thought. But instead of jumping to another thought, if you just stay with this question, where is this I coming from? There is no answer to that question, as I said. So, because any answer is coming from knowledge, then we can again ask the same question, who is answering? Then it will again be clear that every answer is coming from knowledge, from memory, from the mind. And therefore, it's not the answer, because we are asking for the source of the me itself, which is providing all these answers. So then there is nothing to answer. Then we go back to just not knowing it. And to not know it is to dissolve it. So we think we have to, we can have we project all these fancy ideas of some state and some experience and so on. But it's just peace of not knowing. When we are in the deep peace of not knowing, that's why that Upanishad verse again is so beautiful. Then we know. When we don't know, and we are there in that space of not knowing, there is only an open awareness. And in that open awareness, there is nobody there, but there is just the light of presence itself. And that light of presence is not a personal light, but it is just here. And that's what animates the mind, animates the brain, animates the body, animates everything, and it functions on its own. So to come upon that is the whole purpose of this entire work, or what we call as true inquiry or surrender. I'll stop here. Any questions? Or I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, it's like yeah, no, you were talking about not knowing, that state of not knowing, and I was wondering if it is. I was thinking about why is that important? Why is that relevance? But then I think when we started reading the verse, I understood that what Bhagavan is saying is that the self cannot be understood or realized with the mind. Yes. You need to let go. You need to.
Yes.
It's not something that comes like other knowledge.
Correct.
And so you need to go into that state of no mind, which will essentially it's beyond the mind, meaning that it's something that you will see it in silence. And so that was my question: if it, is the not knowing state really the same as the silent, being in silence?
Yes.
And I think that's what he's
Yes.
saying.
So when we say, see, some people say silent mind, or we say no mind, or we say not knowing, all of these are the same thing. It's just the um, space of empty fullness, we can say, in which everything happens. And there things happen on their own. See, when we are, it's a very beautiful thing to be in that space, and then things happen, all the activities, perceptions, thoughts, everything happen. But there can be a tendency to again for the me to rise up and to claim that I am doing this. So then there is the need to again go back to this question and go to the space of not knowing. Because in that space of not knowing, everything happens actually, right? It's not that no mind. That's why when we say no mind, also sometimes these words can be confusing. That's why we don't use that word much. But sometimes, see, that's what it means. It's that space of not knowing. Still, from that things come. See, things can come and then they go back to not knowing. That movement is always there. Yeah.
Couple of things I wanted to add. One is usually the states are only of the mind. Right? So even describing it is hard because it's like you said, it's a space of not knowing, and it's not state.
It's not, yeah.
But also what's beautiful is once you have that curiosity to not know, whatever comes up is still known, right? Especially a thought can be based on knowledge and can take you back into knowing from a previous memory. But in the perception with the sound might still be fresh on you, right? If there is a bird sound, it's known that it's a bird sound, but you don't go into a past memory and associate it, oh, this bird sound is nice or not nice, and things like that. But what I found is the more you're curious about it, because curiosity doesn't bring in any past memory, it really lends itself to being in the now.
Yeah, see, when you're open, actually, see, the thing there is when you are in that space of just open awareness, then you are the curiosity is naturally there, right? That's what.
And it's expansive.
Yes. It's not, see, that's why then there is no such thing as also distraction, right? Everything is just happening. See, only when we have a center, then something is a distraction to that center. Because I want this and I don't want that and all that. But when we are in that space of not knowing, then there is curiosity, as you say, which is that's why also learning happens, right? True learning happens, true curiosity comes, and nobody. But the moment we take ownership of it, then again,
That also the room.
Correct, right? So then you have to be alert. That's why the alertness is important to go back to that not knowing. That's all. Yeah.
Do you want to maybe expand a little bit on the center that you talk about? You mentioned a few times where it's kind of an energy that's coming up, and the center is felt as this energy. You can say existence, you can call it, right? Because people say beingness, existence, all those things are also in a way it's more energetic than that, right? And then when there's full charge to it, that's when the center feels like a real me, right? And there's ownership and things like that. But just staying with even that energy as it is seems to, for that moment, there's recognition that that interdependence goes away.
Yeah, see, that's what I was referring to earlier too. That's the whole thing with the inquiry as well, right? See, the center is whatever word we use, the center, the me, is this energy that is felt within the body as the governing authority of the body, let's say, right? So I mean, as I said, we touch the heart and say I, right? There's this I that's felt to be here, or in general, that's what we feel. It's a very energetic, there's an energy that is rising as me in the body, and it is then giving charge to every image. Each time there's an image, it's like plugging it into the charge. It goes, and the image, the subject of every action has no problem when it's not charged with this center of the me. So when I'm seeing for instance, let's say a child, let's say I'm a parent and I see a child, and I see the child, and the functional relationship is there, and I talk to the child, respond, all that can happen. But once the charge of the me gets attached to that relationship, then it's bringing forth the past attachment, the future projection, and all the other things that take away from the functional, natural relating. So this happens everywhere at work. When you're in a meeting, let's say, I'm sure if you're just simply listening to the merit of the conversation and responding, and there is a freedom there. But the moment there is a charge associated with I am listening, and then there is a judgment of the other person and all of this, then the listening is overtaken by all the other factors. So the whole point of inquiry is to first recognize this, and then come upon this center in its own way without being charged to anything. That's what you're referring to, right? So when you stay with the center without, by default, it goes, and like the verse we saw, it goes and holds on to one form after another. When leaves one form, holds next form, leaves one form. That's how most people are living. And therefore, we don't even see the center. That's why someone in a different place said, and that's true here also, what is the purpose of a center? Like we have Red Mountain Ashram, which is the center. The purpose of the center is to look at the center. Right? So when we look at this, so that's the whole purpose of a center, an ashram, or a place, a satsang, right? Is that we actually take the time to look at the center. I think this is something even you were mentioning last time, that when we are going through the daily work and pressures, there is no space to look at the center, right? Because we are constantly pulled in 100 directions, and the attachments come, the thing. So when we take the space, whether we sit in our own home silently, or whether we walk in nature, or whether we gather together like this, which is even more charged because of the power of the collective, and together we look at it, then we can recognize that there is this center within, which is always running the life through all these various forms. But when stripped of all the forms, and when you look at the center, then, as he says, it takes flight. Because where is the center? If you ask the question, where is it coming from? There is no answer to that. There is no form to it. There is no structure to it. It's just a feeling that we have. And where is that feeling rising from? If we say that, if we put that question to ourselves, that's the whole meaning of the verse, right? In Upadesha Saram, he says, no, in Arunachala Pancharatnam, he says, Ahamiti kuta ayat, iti anvishyantah pravishtayat yamaladhya, avagamya swamrupam, right? So, ahamiti kuta ayat, where is the center coming from? Aham here means the center. Where is this I rising from? When we ask this question, then we come upon this space of not knowing, because we can never know where this I is coming from. We will always want to know and project some idea, right? We can quote the Upanishad, we can quote uh, Ramana Maharshi himself, we can quote, anything we quote is only second-hand knowledge. But if we don't quote anything and we simply stay with that space of not knowing, that space of not knowing is pure awareness. We can never understand it, but we can actually sense it directly.
I think it can also be thought of as the gap between the thoughts. All of us have thoughts. And
yeah, see, gap between thoughts is true. The only thing is it can be, see, it happens on its own and goes, right? So what happens is when there is the gap, there is nobody there, there is no entity there, and then the next thought rises, the me immediately latches onto it. The center latches onto it.
Yeah.
Right? So when you actually look into this, that's why when you look at where the center is coming from, then it's the same as that gap, but you go into it, you could say, with full awareness, you go into the space of not knowingness.
Yes.
That's all.
So between the thoughts, the gap, if one can perceive it, in that gap there is awareness.
Right.
There is just awareness, no thoughts. And
But you cannot get to the gap. You get to the gap with the thought, the source of the thought. That's what it is.
no, but there is a gap between thoughts.
See, the only point is, it's very simple. Between two thoughts, whatever gap is there, the moment you know there is a gap, the thought is functioning. Right? So when there is no thought at all, there is a gap.
I think it can just be awareness.
Well,
I mean,
that's
possible to be in awareness with no thoughts.
That's exactly what I was saying. Yeah. See, so when you say, that's exactly it. So what I'm saying is also that whether we call it a space between two thoughts, or whether we just look into this, we are coming to the same ground of awareness without any knowingness.
Yes, 100%.
And so it can happen unconsciously in a gap between two thoughts. There can be, for instance, a complete, let's say, see, deep sleep is an absence between thoughts.
Yeah, if it is unconscious, then there is no point to that gap, because essentially we can't, we are not in awareness. But what I think when you call this state of not knowing, I was just saying maybe there's another way to also think about it.
Yeah, but again, that's fine. But the thing is, the main point of inquiry here is, as pointed out, is to go to that gap that you point out with full alertness, instead of that happening. That's all. See, it can happen, but here we are going into it with full alertness, totally without any, and then there is that space of not knowing that is immediately available. And that space of not knowing that's immediately available through this inquiring and staying without answering, but just staying in that space, is all there is. That's all. As long as you see it. Yeah. See, that's why I also say every thought is a portal to being. Just like that's what you're saying. Look at any bead, you go to the wire, or you could, another metaphor that's used is, you look at any ornament, you go to the gold. You don't have to. If you look at the essence of the ornament, you see the gold right there, if you're not caught in the form. So yeah, that's the same thing. When you look at the thought and go to its very source like this, then you go to that space of stillness. See, like even right now, when we are sitting silently for even a minute, if we can just relax into that not knowingness, right? We don't have to know, we don't have to think I have to meditate, we don't have to think I have to do something, I have to watch this, watch that. The mind always wants to say something to keep the narrative of the me going. So the true simple pointer is just relax into not knowing anything, not doing anything. When there is a need, action comes on its own, thoughts come on its own, perceptions happen on its own. There is an intelligence that's operating, making it happen. When there is no need, there is no point in constantly having a self narrative, but just rest into this beautiful space of silence within. That's what we call as stillness. Be still is to rest in this space of silence.
Namaste, everyone. Um, so it was interesting, good segue that Suresh also talked about how the center is about finding our center or, or really seeing it clearly. And so, as many of you know, Red Mountain Ashram was founded with this purpose of self-inquiry and stillness that Ramana Maharshi and many other sages have shown to all of us. And so, the center definitely has met a bunch of its purpose because, as you all know, we have been meeting now for about 6 months here, and a number of people have had the opportunity to come and stay overnight and have the time with Suresh to really go deeper into the teachings, and so that's the purpose, and it feels like it's meeting that purpose. However, a center is not possible without contributions from a number of people. A number of people in this room have already contributed, even online, have been contributing. But the ask is again, if you have the ability to do so and you find value in the teachings, they would really appreciate contributions of any amount to the Red Mountain Ashram, so we can continue these programs. We can continue to have people come from outside and stay here. And Saturday satsangs as well as retreats. The couple of other things that are coming up is September 1st is Bhagwan's Advent Day into our Arunachal Ashram. So we'll have a event or we'll have a satsang to celebrate that occasion. And then end of September 26th and 27th, there's going to be a retreat in Portland that's been hosted by the Portland family. So we're very happy and grateful to them that we can do this again. We already had a retreat early this year, which was beautiful. And the topic of this retreat will be Bhagavad Gita. So there'll be some verses from Bhagavad Gita that are taken, and we'll go deeper into that and the topic. Anything else? And then two other things. We have a great newsletter every month. So if you have not been looking at it, please subscribe. You can go to our website and join there. Subscribe to Substack. Yeah, and then and then the next thing is Akila is doing an amazing job of keeping our social media updated. So please do follow us on social media, and we'll also post our newsletters there as well as our upcoming events. So